Well, and I thought it was me at first, but then after 3 hours of reading through forums and stuff, it pretty much sounds like anyone that's bought this drone, this kit, and then tried to blast new firmware to it, it breaks something when they do that.
Like, that's not what it's
And then
supposed to do.
I spent like an hour looking around for like the stock firmware file somewhere like on the website. You figured they'd have like the stock actually sent out from the factory with somewhere.
No,
No, it's complicated, but I figured that if they don't return it, I'm just gonna wait till taxes come in and then I'll probably just end up with a drone, which is good, knowing good parts. Just go with that. I've gotten good enough at flying that I trust myself to fly a bigger drone now, so.
gotcha. Yeah, well, best of luck with that. I know, I haven't tried it, but I know it can be really interesting to
They're
fly
fun.
around.
And then there's a couple, so I learned mostly on a simulator before actually buying a drone. Going like, so you just plug your drone controller into your computer, and it's about 90 to 95% accurate as to what like real FPV flights like, physics and all that. And so you get a good understanding of on your computer before you're in real life, throwing your drone against the wall and stuff, so.
Nice, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, see ya. Hello, how are you? Good afternoon. Good, how's it going? All right, welcome back. Good afternoon, and I hope that the end of the week is treating you well, TGIF. So one thing I wanted to put on everybody's radar is, if you haven't done so already, now is a great time to start reaching out to your advisors and starting to look at spring 2023 classes. Course registration is going to open starting next week, starting with veterans, seniors, and then moving into everybody, I believe, by February 14th. So I encourage you to start looking at the course schedule on there to check out the courses. If you're a comm major or minor, or you're interested in comm courses, or you have any questions about comm courses, we're going to offer them free. Let me know. Right? I chair the comm program, so I'm in charge of helping develop the schedule, and I'll let you know what you should be looking at as you're thinking about those courses. I did want to highlight the courses that I'll be teaching this spring. If you're interested in any of these, I'm teaching a whopping 4 different courses. So I'm teaching communication theory, couple of you have taken that already. Communication theory is a course where we explore a lot of different approaches to communication. We explore theories and ideas in communication in more detail. It's a main course that majors take. I'll also be teaching a senior capstone called Communication Research Design. So if you're a senior, this is a course where we'll be exploring and helping you to develop a research project. I'm also teaching a course if you're looking for social science credit. I'm teaching an online course called Communicating Health and Science. I've taught it face-to-face in the past. This is a course where if you're interested in a career in healthcare, health-related fields, or you just want to learn more about it, we'll talk about how we communicate and advocate on health issues. And then lastly, I'm teaching a face-to-face course called Interviewing, in which we will be working together, doing a whole bunch of mock interviews and practice interviews, such as job interviews, informational interviews, and a whole other variety of types of interviews, so that we can help you to develop those skills. So just wanted to make a quick plug for those courses, and those will be coming up shortly. So to get us started, last class, we took some time to understand culture and culture's relationship to small group communication. So we've been spending this week looking into the dynamics of culture, how different cultures communicate, and looking at some of the different measurements of cultures. We talked about uncertainty reduction theory, right? The idea that we oftentimes experience this anxiety and apprehension around people. And we also explored some of the different ways that we can measure and assess culture. So as a reminder, we talked about the idea that we become encultured and participate in groups over time, right? We become members through passing the torch to a new generation of people in the group. We also develop rituals, patterns, and behavior, right? We oftentimes will develop a set of things that we do, maybe they're warm-ups, activities, traditions that happen the longer and longer we spend in that particular group. We also did an activity last class that can be one of your candidates for the small group assessment, in which we looked at the different measures of cultural difference and the ways that they show us how different cultures choose to communicate. For today, we're going to be taking a little bit more of a look at international structures and organizations, the idea of systems and how systems shape our communication more broadly. So we'll be looking at some examples there, and then we'll be talking about three major approaches to small group communication through the X, Y, and Z. We'll be doing a group scenario toward the end of class, and that scenario will also be one of the options that you can use for your small group assessment if you'd like. So I think it's useful, right, to start by talking about a system. So far in this class, we've been talking about how when we think about culture and small group communication, we need either A, people come into groups from their very different walks of life, different languages, different ways of interpreting verbal and nonverbal communication, different assumptions about the world, such as religious, spiritual views, values that members of a group see as important, and so forth. We've also talked about the ways in which, as we become a member of the group, that group develops its own culture, its own set of norms, behaviors, activities, traditions, and so on that group does. But there is a third thing that I think is really useful for us to explore as we're thinking about culture's relationship to our communication. And that's the role of a system, right? So when I'm talking about a system, I'm talking more about how a group is structured, designed, and why it has the infrastructure that it does in ways that reflect and represent the cultural values of a particular group of people or population. I think a really good example here that I want to share is about the political structure and organization of Lebanon. So I wanted to share a clip that talks a little bit about its political structure, because I think that does a good job of helping us to think about a systems approach to understanding how small groups might communicate.
Lebanon has one of the most complex political systems in the world. The tiny country is made up of 18 different sects, and its political system is designed to give nearly all of them a say. Since Lebanon's independence, the country's leadership positions have been divided between three main sects. Lebanon's president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni, and the speaker of the House a Shia. Seats in parliament are also based on sectarian proportion, with each sect receiving a set number of seats in the political body. Lebanese citizens can only vote for candidates from the specific sex that are designated for their district. This sort of system often leads to political stalemate and sometimes even violence. So is there a better political system for Lebanon?
So kind of an interesting example here, right? So in the case of Lebanon, right, we can think about in kind of leading up to its independence and its current state, how its political system has been shaped in large part by violence, by poverty, by conflict, and the way that that conflict has largely existed across different religious and cultural lines, right? So when we're looking perhaps as an outsider at Lebanon's political structure and its distribution, we might think to ourselves, why does this culture or this sect have 13 seats? Why does this one have 27? The answer, right, is that it's the result of a complicated set of agreements, negotiations, discussions, and so forth that led to them producing the agreement that they did with the distribution that they did, right? So our ability to understand how this group functions, how its political system operates, requires an understanding of the history, the context, and the legacy of Lebanon that helps us to make sense of and parse out its political system, right? That sounds weird to us, but to an outsider, right? The structure of the United States and its political system also has a whole bunch of quirks, right? We might think about the variety of different branches, right? Executive, legislative, and judicial, right? This is not a political science class, but I think that there are some good examples here about how structurally elements of the United States system lead to unique ways in which people communicate. One thing that we've been seeing a lot in the news over the past several weeks has been related to the United States House of Representatives, right? It's not only its structure, right, with the election and kind of multiple votes for the Speaker of the House, but also the membership of committees, right? So typically the party that has power over a chamber, such as the House or the Senate, has the ability to determine the leadership of a particular subcommittee or group, right? So the House of Representatives has Republican control, the US Senate has Democratic control, right? So there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks over membership of committees, including foreign services, and who should or should not be a member of that committee. We can think about a lot of other committees, such as appropriations, which handles the distribution and use of tax dollars, right? And how some of these subcommittees, groups, and so forth are shaped, institutionally constrained, and behave and communicate in very different ways, right? We can also think about the Supreme Court itself being an example of a small group that has its own ways of communicating, its own norms, its own expectations, and so forth, right? So all that to say, a lot of structures, political institutions, and so on have been impacted by history, by context, and shaped in a very particular way, with very particular norms that impact how members of that group are choosing to communicate. We'll talk more about some of the structures of formal communication later, including Robert's Rules of Order as we move forward in class. So they guide, direct, constrain, and promote, right? Using things such as political institutions or systems as a way of moving things through, right? Here at EOU, if you are trying to make a change, right? So I brought in some new classes here at EOU, right? We had to go through a process where we worked through different systems like a curriculum committee, like a college meeting, a lot of hoops to jump through, but it's an example of how systems are used in order to shape the participation of the group. International communication, right, is communication that is occurring between different nations or groups, right? So in other words, it's international, right? It is interplay. You have people of different nationalities or backgrounds that are choosing to communicate with each other. And we know that this is complicated for a lot of reasons. It can not only be complicated because people from different cultures and backgrounds might have language barriers, might have cultural differences, right? Some countries don't use physical contact. Some cultures, it's considered acceptable to shake hands. In other cultures, not so much. But also in terms of the competing demands, values, and what other cultures see as important. One really good example of this is to look at international trade, right? So we have seen over the last couple decades the idea of neoliberalism, right, which is the combination of capitalism, right, with globalization or the global connectedness that's been formed between countries over time. and the way that that's played out in terms of our international agreements, such as free trade agreements, right? So, for example, you might be familiar with the idea of a tariff. A tariff is a tax on goods that come from outside. So sometimes tariffs are used in order to protect local industries and companies. One really good example of this is with cars, right? We might have tariffs or taxes on imported cars that's designed so that those cars are less competitive or more expensive compared to cars that are made in the United States in order to incentivize people to buy cars domestically, right? Another way we can think about this is present in a lot of farming and agriculture. For example, in some countries, the production of certain products like sugar beets is kept going because tariffs, which allow local farmers to continue to produce and sell within their country. But if it was opened up, right, without the use of tariffs, then their prices could no longer be competitive compared to other industries, and they would lose out in the market, right? So regardless of where you come across in thinking about global politics, global economics, there are a lot of competing issues that you have to consider, right? To pursue something like free trade agreement, you push back against that. How do you negotiate some of those issues? We've seen this as it pertains to a lot of international conflict as well. Thinking about a lot of different sources of conflict and tension and the ways that those have been connected to our ability to communicate. Another example here of how groups might choose to communicate, we can think about the United Nations Security Council, right? The United Nations Security Council is made up of 5 permanent members, and then it has the rest of the members who rotate from different countries. And at those meetings, right, they pass resolutions and develop kind of statements to address a whole variety of different issues. Again, they have done a whole lot over the last couple of years in accounting for a lot of international disputes, disagreement, and so forth. So when we look at international organizations, again, this is not social studies or civics, but I think it's useful to see some context to how small groups operate. One thing we can think about is the idea of democracy, right? So a lot of political scientists are fond of saying that the United States is not a democracy, it's a republic, insofar as we elect a representative who is representing the interests of the population, right? But we can think about direct democracy as it pertains to things such as ballot measures, right, or referendums, where we get to vote on particular issues or topics. For example, Oregon held a ballot initiative last year that was related to gun control measures in the state of Oregon, right? Regardless of how you feel about that, that was an example about how participation through something like a referendum can happen democratically. We also know that democracy and democratic participation can either be a majority, most often between 2 choices, or it can happen through a plurality, right, where somebody receives the most support, but that support does not necessarily reach the threshold of 50% or reach a majority. If you're like me, if you're like a nerd that likes to follow a lot of congressional politics and congressional races, right, you might be familiar with the U.S. Senate race in Georgia, right? That was a case in which there were 2 major candidates from both political parties, right? The Republican, Herschel Walker, the Democrat, Raphael Warnock, but there were also independent and libertarian candidates who were running. And as a result of that, neither candidate in the general election reached 50% of the vote. And when that happens in the state of Georgia, they have a runoff policy, right, where the top 2 candidates run against each other. And so that's why there was a runoff there, the same way there was in 2020, right? So in some cases, there is a plurality. Nobody is reaching an outright majority, but it's a question of who receives the biggest slice of the pie. We can think about centralized rule, right? This might be a small group that's structured through concentrated power, such as a dictatorship, right? As former President George W. Bush said, if this were a dictatorship, it'd be a heck of a lot easier, just so long as I'm the dictator. So in these types of systems, we might see a small group in which ultimately there is a leader or head of the group who's making a decision. And there might be different levels of distribution and delegation that they get from members of the group. On the one end, it's my way or the highway, right? I'm the leader and you all have to follow and listen to what I have to say. On the other end, perhaps The leader allows people to take a vote and moves forward with what the group agrees to do. So even if somebody has power, right, there are questions over how they might delegate or offer the opportunity for other members of the group to provide input. We might think about anarchy, right? And we oftentimes think about anarchy in terms of chaos and lack of any sort of organization. But there are also a lot of structures and situations in which anarchy does exist and offer some form of organization in its own right. Several years ago, I was in Denmark, and in the middle of Copenhagen, there's actually an anarchist collective that resides in what used to be military barracks called Christiania. It was kind of interesting. You weren't allowed to take any photos in there. It was kind of weird, right? But it was a group that formed its own set of rules and goals outside of the jurisdiction of the country. So another thing to consider here is the role of civil law, right? Civil law would involve rules that are specifically spelled out. We can consider these, you've taken a class related to law or civics, right? The idea of enumerated rules. That which is written, is clear, is given in something like the US Constitution, right? First Amendment is a good example of civil law. And then common law is dealing more with interpretation and precedent, right? So if we think about the topic of abortion, right? Regardless of where you feel about that topic, the legality and history of legality of abortion follows more under the common law frame, right? Roe versus Wade was a decision issued by the US Supreme Court, right? And it restricted the ability of states to outright ban abortion. Then that precedent, right, was changed and overturned through the Dobbs decision, which has allowed states to issue bans on abortion, right? That was an example of a law that was not something that was hard-coded or written, such as a right to or ban on abortion, although some states have since implemented either codified protections or restrictions on abortion access, right? So that's an example here about how common law might be used in a different way. It's not hard-coded, right, by the Supreme Court, but it did have impacts through precedent on how future cases were decided, i.e. if somebody was attempting to pass a ban on abortion while Roe was still considered precedent, that would probably be struck down by the court. So the next thing that I think is useful here is to think about markets, right? So I was alluding to this a bit, but it's the idea that how an economic system is structured can create significant differences in how members choose to communicate and to engage with one another. Economic systems provide significant differences in how cultures choose to communicate. One kind of spectrum of extremes we could think about, right, is thinking about communism and capitalism. You can also think about a variety of kind of socialist or democratic socialist organizations in countries such as Europe and so forth, right? So I think it's useful for us to understand that the governmental and market structure of a country is going to dictate the ways that country chooses to communicate. One good example here is if you think about Korea, right? So if you flash your brain back to history, social studies, you think about the Korean War, right? Well, since then, right, we've seen, despite a lot of demographic and cultural similarities between folks who resided on the northern or southern end, very stark differences in terms of how those countries have changed. Right? You think about North Korea, right? North Korea, we might think about Kim Jong-un, we might think about a very restrictive and controlled government and structure. We might think about how North Korea as a country has consistently pursued the proliferation of nuclear weapons as a means of securitizing and exerting power, right? South Korea went in a very different direction and focused much more on global economy, on global trade, on international agreements and international cooperation. And this is a photo taken at night from an aerial view. Here's North Korea, very dark. Here's South Korea, all lit up from all of the trade and businesses and buildings and so forth built on that end. So not to make a statement, just to say that there are differences in terms of how these countries are operating, behaving, and so forth on the basis of their market and political structure. How many people are familiar or have heard about Martin Shkreli, heard about that case involving pharmaceutical drugs? So this was a case that gained a lot of attention a few years ago. He was the founder of what's called Turing Pharmaceuticals, and he gained a lot of controversy because several years ago, he dramatically increase the price of a drug that's oftentimes used in life-saving contexts my understanding, it's anti-parasitic and designed to help people with HIV/AIDS. So the price of that escalated, I believe, from about $35 to about $750. And so there was a lot of discussion, controversy, and so forth surrounding his decision. And I wanted to share a clip that I think helps to get us thinking about where that decision has been placed in the broader communication landscape.
I have 2 questions for you. The first is, if you could rewind the clock a few months, I wonder if you would do anything differently. And the second is, I'd like to know if you think corporate reputation matters.
I probably would have raised the price higher, is probably what I would have done. I think healthcare prices are inelastic. I could have raised it higher and made more profits, which is my primary. And again, no one wants to say it, no one's proud of it, but this is a capitalist society, capitalist system, and capitalist rules. And my investors expect me to maximize profits, not to minimize them or go half or go 70%, but to go to 100% of the profit curve that we're all taught in MBA class. The second question is about reputation.
Yeah, you're maximizing profit for your shareholders. Why are you spending it on R&D?
Well, that's going to maximize long-term earnings. Okay, so those R&D investments, we hope to make 10, 20, 50 times the money on.
And so essentially here, you think that
Right. So he got a lot of controversy for this, right? From his perspective, he was maximizing profit. This was seen as relatively inelastic, right? There wasn't competition in the same way. But, right, for a lot of folks who might have relied on that medication, that was seen as a problem in an area of a lot of investigation. So again, regardless of where you fall in this, I think it's an example of some of the ways that our communication in group settings is shaped by the role of markets, trade, and so forth in explaining some of the ways that we communicate. So thinking about global trade, global relations, our discussion of a lot of things such as free trade agreements, you can see this is the source of a lot of conflict. So what I want to talk about now, before we do our group activity for the day, is 3 different theories that help us to guide and understand small group behavior, right? Not one of these theories is 100% correct in every situation. I think that's why we can explore and contrast these a bit. There are some ways that you might find one of these theories more persuasive than the other, but they do help us to explain how we choose to structure, organize, and participate in different group scenarios. So let's talk first about theory X. If you think back toward the very beginning of the term, we talked about the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The idea that we communicate in order to fulfill particular needs that are important to us, right? We need food, basic resources to survive, then we need safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Okay? The best way to sum up theory X is to say that people are not especially excited about working, about doing their best when they're in a group setting. Right? People are generally more predisposed against it. One of the runner-up for word of the year or phrase of the year in 2022 was quiet quitting, right? Used to describe folks who continue to work at a job, but are disengaged, or doing the bare minimum, are looking for other opportunities, and so forth, right? There's a lot of discussion about like work-life balance, about withdrawing and spending less time associated with work. Folks under that framework would abide by theory X, that people are generally not people excited about labor and working, but people might do work, they might participate in groups, they might attend meetings because they have to, right? My coworker used to say, I'm just here so I don't get fined. People consider some safety, love and acceptance, self-esteem, and so on, self-actualization. But at the core of it, they're just focused on these basic needs, and where they're fulfilling those other needs is more likely to be outside of small group or work scenarios. I'm just here to do the basics. I don't want to socialize. I just want to do my job. I'm going to go get those other needs fulfilled outside of work. Give me my paycheck. Theory Y is the opposite, right? Theory Y assumes that at its core, people want to do a good job, right? People want to self-actualize and be the best version of themselves. Self-actualization at the top of the hierarchy means that you're pursuing your passions, your interests, you're doing the absolute best that you can. So under theory Y, when you're working in a group, That means that you're going to behave in your group in order to achieve self-actualization. You're going to work together, you're going to collaborate, you're going to try to make the best project that you possibly can. You want to win and have a great season, right? You're going to do everything possible to make your group work the way that you want it to. People are ambitious, they're self-directed, and they're able to self-actualize. They want the best out of the group that they're in. Then we have theory Z. And you can think about theory Z as the tightrope that you walk between those two things, right? It neither suggests that people are disposed against work or totally into and hardworking, but instead that people are somewhere in the middle. In order to work effectively in a group and achieve the best synergy and harmony in a group, there are certain things that people need, right? They need reinforcement. One way of thinking about this is positively reinforcing them. You're doing a great job, you're participating effectively, you're doing what you need as a part of the group, right? You might also think about offering feedback, doing a performance review, and saying what that person could do differently, or asking somebody in a group who hasn't spoken up to say something. And belonging, right? Belonging, becoming a full member of the group, that doesn't happen right away, that happens over time. You develop a sense of community, you get to know people, you feel more connected to people, and as a result of that, you might seek more of those social needs out of the group. So the best way to think about theory Z is, okay, we can be motivated, we can try to self-actualize, but in order for that to happen, we've got to have some things in the group that can allow that to work. So I think these three different theories do a good job of helping us to contrast and better understand some of the dynamics of group communication. Given that, what I'm going to be doing is numbering you off and dividing you into three different groups. One group will be on theory X, one group will be on theory Y, and one group will be on theory Z. You and your group members get to pick a small business that you'd like to start. And what I'd like you to do is to take some time to talk about how the theory that you've been assigned would impact the way that you would hire and treat coworkers. Based on the assumptions of that theory, how would you behave and treat other people in the group? How could you organize your business to support a diverse and international set of workers, right? And then lastly, what were some of the things that you could do to create a good workplace culture? So I'll give you the chance to discuss, take about 10 to 15 minutes in your groups about this. So I'm going to go ahead and number you off. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you are a 1, you're assigned to theory X, you should move over here. If you're a 2, you're theory Y, here in the middle. And if you're a 3, you're theory Z, and you should be over here on this side. So take some time to discuss, have somebody write or type for your group, and be prepared to share some of your thoughts about this theory and the way that you can engage with culture through your group.
It's a hard employee to have, right? So you want to go? Yeah. We have our small business. Tiny restaurant.
Everything at the restaurant.
All right. It's like, well, man, I get ready. So,
Very
who does, yes, are against work. I've employed a lot of people. But we, that's the thing we have to work around, right? Okay. So like, give them incentives. Yeah, it's like, whatever you bring. Right, so basically.
In general, so generally you think people are against.
I guess the theory is basically everyone's got something they really like.
It's just people have.
I don't know. I haven't had one.
Maybe it should be like, maybe it's like, in the aggregate, so like, people.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Rather than individuals, they start slacking off a bit.
Okay, so we could just say, like, we hired. Okay, after that.
They usually probably hire a kid.
I think, yeah, hiring younger is probably good. Younger person. Yeah. Who work the day.
16, 17, high school,
Um,
maybe a college student.
all right, how can you organize a small business to support a diverse and motivating support instead of work, make it a good environment, so like.
Although,
Getting good hours too. I
yeah.
mean, that's hard in the restaurant industry. You're gonna be working the weekend, most likely working the weekend.
Honestly, if you, I've been in like that kind of situation before, and the way that it's worked out is.
Right, okay, so, yeah.
Yeah,
making sure that they're not having discriminatory
Yeah.
practices and.
Peppermint,
everyone
peppermint,
follow.
Yeah.
you gotta get it.
So for the how.
Opportunity of. But basically, everyone gets the same chance to get their foot in the doors.
Well, I mean.
Well, maybe not at international.
I mean, you really can, like, there's a different number of people like who work at restaurants, like, you just hire like based on skill.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah, so.
And I wouldn't,
Because they have. A lot of them are very. Mhm. It's done. Yeah, okay, that's good. I know I was at a restaurant, all the folks were. Yeah, we didn't. That's what I say.
like I do own a restaurant, I work like a week. But you spoke really good, sharing accent. Other than that, I don't think.
This was really difficult.
Yeah, make it marriage is kind of higher. You can do the best, you can do the best.
Good workplace culture, like, you know, like, working honest, support each other, just that, done right. like,
People want.
Yeah, that was kind of
Make
my
sure people
opinion,
know.
my opinion, like, you just have to agree with me.
Yeah.
I like it, like, a lot of other people.
In my experience, looking at the back of a lot of jokes. Just between everyone,
Yeah, that's good.
like everyone pulls in each other's way, makes questionable jokes.
Yeah. I'm like, you want to then
Yeah.
listen to a conversation.
Have this.
Sounds like groups are making some good progress. I'll give you a couple more minutes to continue discussing and have somebody that's ready to share.
Yeah, so I just said, sure. That kind of develop a line theory that every, yeah, bro.
Or
man,
what
I
you want.
missed, oh, that's all. It's good. I need to watch the last one. Right, because everyone's wanting to work.
No, good for you.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my room just walked in this Sunday, so. Not too interested in television.
Sorry, just trying to check my email. I checked my email and then it just took me to TikTok. That's for afterward.
So making sure people are having work and stuff. Like, right, yeah.
Okay. Sounds like groups are about done here, so let's take some time to talk about this together. We'll get out a little early. Let's start by talking with Theory X. So first of all, go ahead and share the small business that you all came up with, and then how you address these questions, given Theory X and its relationship to small group communication.
Yeah, so we when with the idea of like kind of like a restaurant, maybe like on the smaller end of things. With Theory X, it's kind of hard to like want to hire people knowing that they're not giving full effort, but like with the restaurant, you kind of tend to find like younger people. Like you can like have a high school more the dishwasher, like younger servers. So like as much as they may not want to be there, it's kind of more like a side hustle to them instead of a career. So that's kind of made it easier.
Sure.
And then with the diverseness, we all have personal experience, like whether it's in a restaurant, but like cooks might speak like Spanish or something, and so you can make it diverse. Like cooks in the back that are not the same ethnicity as people who are working in the front, either or. And then a good way to create a good workplace is we said like kind of like building good chemistry, like being able to like crack jokes with like maybe the servers and the chefs and stuff like that, and then like compliments on food and service.
Okay. Yeah, so one thing that I think you all are hitting on that's really important with Theory X is to think about this in terms of situation, right? When you're looking at these three theories, rather than say that it's for everybody in every situation, I think it's fair to say that there are work settings where Theory X makes more sense and ones where Y or Z makes more sense, right? I think in identifying something like, working at a restaurant, as you pointed out, you're going to have a lot of students and folks who, might see this as part-time, as a side hustle, might not be people who want to continue to do that for their full career, although you might have some that are, right? So they're going to come in attitudinally with, what do I need to do? How do I need to make my shift? And aren't going to necessarily bring in, I'm going to do the best job that I can, knowing that it's temporary and knowing that it's kind of not something that they see as their future career. So I like the way that you were talking about how you integrate participation and inclusion with that in mind, thinking about how the unique constraints, the attitude that people are coming in with is going to impact the ways that the groups go. So good points there. How about here with the Theory Y group? What did you all choose and how did you explore some of these questions?
All right, so are we doing some questions?
So you're welcome to work your way through these three.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, the Y theory is everyone's passionate about the work and it's kind of their career, or they're really dedicated to it for some reason or another. Like maybe they're just super committed because they need the money really bad or something.
Yep.
But so to ensure like how does it impact the way you hire and treat coworkers? You want to make sure you get people that are really passionate and committed to the work, and see it as a career rather than other people, because they wouldn't feel the same way and it would clash with culture.
Okay.
So really, you want people that are dedicated like yourself. And then how can you organize your small business to support a diverse and international set of workers? You just want to put up an inclusive environment, basically, where everyone has equal opportunity to apply and get their foot in the door. You can't have really opportunity or end result be the same, because that's just really hard to pull off. But if everyone has the same shot coming in, then it's viewed as about the best you can do. Make sure there's no biases in the hiring process for people's treatments, no discriminatory practices. Maybe do some things to encourage group unity and such. And then finally, to create a good workplace culture in the Y system, we definitely want low power distance because everyone's working hard and doing their best. And if you get like really uppity about that, people are kind of gonna get spiteful, like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm doing my best, and busting my ass, and these guys are always condescending to me and stuff. Like, it's just not gonna go all that well. So you want low power distance, work doing their best. And then just making sure that no one's cutting corners and everyone's doing it safely. Because if they're really committed to getting the work done, sometimes people can kind of get sloppy or overly ambitious about, cutting deadlines or doing things for the good of the company over the good of the community and things like that. And then finally, basically ensuring that open communication is still there, just so the group can get along. Sure.
Excellent. So really appreciated your group's points here. I really like the way that your group incorporated discussion of power distance, right? Oftentimes, like inappropriate power distance relative to the rest of the group can be kind of inappropriate and off-putting, right? It can alienate group members. I was part of a community as a graduate student, right, where people would say, oh, hi, I'm Shirley, I'm Teresa, right? And then there was somebody who's like, I insist on being called, Dr. Johnson, right? And in that setting, I kind of went against the norms, which is first name basis, which is fine in that group, in a way that kind of created a lot of space and distance. What did you all end up deciding for the small business for this one?
We went for like kind of we kind of pictured like a mechanic shop or metallurgy or something like that, where it's really hands-on and you kind of got to work together efficiently. And it's a career, it's not something people just pick up and leave usually.
I think that's a good way of thinking about Theory Y, because there's a lot of space, right? There's a lot of room. It's both a career place, right? It gives people the opportunity to think and work with their hands, and solve puzzles, and do all the work that they need to in that environment, right? And I think that it connects to this idea of creating that space of ambition. I think one of the things to think about if you are in a situation where Theory Y makes sense is that people will be bored, they'll be frustrated, they'll be disengaged if you abide by Theory Y when they get bored, when they feel like they've hit a ceiling or a wall where they can't grow or do things anymore. If you're saddling people with tasks to do that are very menial, that don't really challenge them, and they're doing that over and over again, right? They're going to start to disengage. They're going to start to be frustrated that they don't have other opportunities. So creating an opportunity for people to continue to be challenged, but also to recognize that you don't want to go too far off script and to be too independent and outside of what you're being asked to do. That can be one of the challenges of Theory Y, people who go off script in an inappropriate way. You might think back to the beginning of class to independence and the idea of having that type of role of delegation and leadership. But at its best, right, you get people who are thinking out of the box, who are engaging and really want to participate in that community. And then how about the Theory Z group?
At the middle group, we kind of, for who we were looking to hire, we were looking for well-rounded individuals that have expertise to give their specific roles that they could play in our company for a clothing company. We'd be strict, but yet give them freedom to do and express what they want to do for us, and if they feel that is best for us. Number two, again, we would use their areas of expertise that we listen to them and listen to their inputs and what they have to say, but not be afraid to be like, hey, let's steer away from this. Let's don't be afraid to realign them, even though they might know what they're talking about. And then to create a good workplace culture, we would set a schedule with an agenda and goals. Again, we allow creativity from our coworkers, but not be afraid to tell them, hey, you gotta do this way.
Yeah.
Always giving up the.
So it's a balancing act, right? So oftentimes, if you're abiding by theory Z, it's the idea that yes, your group has tasks to do. You can affirmatively prepare people for those tasks by developing something like an agenda and set of responsibilities. But you do allow space for people in that group to work together effectively and collaborate, right? So sometimes we're in a group and we think to ourselves, what, there's this coffee social, or there's this like first 10 minutes where we're just hanging out, right? Or we're sharing a fun fact about ourselves and we're scared because we're thinking, oh God, I have a fun fact, but it's too weird. What's a fun fact that's like appropriate for the setting, right? So, we have some challenges of figuring out why these social spaces exist, but sometimes they're deliberately chosen in a small group to help to build that cohesion, that membership and camaraderie. You're getting to know people as a way of being able to better work together and collaborate. It's all work all the time. You don't really have a space to get to know people outside of that context. But if it's all fun and games, right, you don't have the opportunity to really focus on the tasks that you need to do. So navigating that balance and understanding that sometimes groups are deliberately created to create space for both is oftentimes a way that theory Z can be used effectively. So again, these three theories, right? No one theory is necessarily correct all the time, but I think that these three help us to better understand how we should approach, structure, and participate in group meetings with some of the ways that group membership can play in. So these are definitely some ideas that you could incorporate as you're working on your small group assessment for a couple of weeks from now. So to wrap up for today, we talked about international systems, international structure and communication, and the way that it shapes our group behavior. We talked about theories X, Y, and Z and how they impact our communication in group settings and our assumptions about how workers will behave in those types of groups. So next week, we will be shifting gears to talk about group problem solving and some of the ways that we can work effectively to resolve tasks and issues as we work together in groups. So if you haven't done so already, please email or pass forward your group activities for the day. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Have a good, safe weekend. Enjoy the cold winter weather, and I will see you all again next week.